Hello, my fellow dust dwellers, and of course all other forms of being. My name is Rainbow Slaney, and I have a real bone to pick. If you guys know me, I love a good story, whether it be through movies, TV shows, or video games. And really, who doesn't love a good story? But sometimes the story isn't good. Now, depending on the movie, this would be fine. If you don't like something, that's your opinion, and you're entitled to that. As long as you aren't hurting anybody over it, it isn't that big of a deal, and you're welcome to critique said material you dislike. But this logic gets thrown out the window when someone dislikes and or critiques a movie that, according to a lot of misguided people, is made for kids. What do you think when you hear the words kids show or kids movie? I personally think of things like Dora the Explorer, The Backyardigans, Paw Patrol, things that preschoolers would watch, which are meant to teach them cognitive thinking. These are shows and movies that are meant to teach, so narratively there isn't anything to critique here. But most people point to a lot of other things that are kids' material as well. For example, say you're critiquing a bad quote-unquote kids movie. My first offenders would be movies like Alpha and Omega or Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. You critique it, you publish it to YouTube, or Twitter, or MySpace. I don't judge. Immediately, you'll most likely get bombarded with comments like, "Why are you critiquing this so hard? It's just a kids' movie," or "It's just a kids' show, calm down." I mostly see these kinds of comments on videos critiquing any kind of piece of animated media, because most people see animated movies as kids' movies, which in general is honestly a dumb perspective to have. There are literal tons of animated movies and shows that are for all audiences. Stuff like Kubo and the Two Strings, Ponyo, My Little Pony, the list goes on. Hell, you could even make an argument for anime with this logic. If you tell me with a straight face that anime is for kids, when you have shows like Attack on Titan, Death Note, JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, and Inuyasha, I will go fucking apeshit. If you do use that argument for people who review and critique quote-unquote kids movies, then boy am I about to debunk your argument. But first we have to go over what makes a good movie. And before you ask, don't worry, it'll tie into what I have to say after the fact. Characters. You can't really have a movie without a character or multiple characters. But that's not all, you have to give them personality too. Who's the main character? What's their goal? What's the motivation to reach their goal, if any? Do they have friends? Do they have enemies? What are their most notable traits? Do they have character arc? These questions should be the first things you think of when writing a main character of a story. I'll give you an example of one of my characters just for perspective. This is Rivet. She's a scientist/inventor. Her goal is to use her intelligence to better the world around her. She has plenty of friends, but as far as I've written about her, she doesn't have any enemies. Her most notable traits being that she's extremely intelligent, she's strict and hardworking, and she's also quite introverted and keeps to herself most of the time unless she's around close friends. Now, of course, there's a lot more to characters than just personalities, such as backstory, if they have any, some things they dislike, their role in the world they live in, but I'm afraid I can't talk about my characters here, and I can't talk about all the stuff that makes a character here either, so I'll just link a video about it if I can find one. Setting. The setting in a story is also very important. Where does the story take place? What are the rules and logic of the setting? Are there multiple worlds? Are there any important details in the world or setting that is relevant to the story? These are all good questions to ask yourself when you're thinking of a setting for your story. When writing the story, it's also a good idea to find ways to explain the rules through circumstance, especially when it's in a fictional world. For example, in My Little Pony, Twilight Sparkle, the main character, gets sent off to Ponyville by her mentor. She doesn't know the customs of the town, and she starts to learn over the course of each episode. This is what's known as a fish out of water scenario. It's also worth mentioning that you want to use exposition as little as possible when writing the rules of your world. It's usually better to establish things beforehand, or, like I said, with a fish out of water scenario, so that we learn about this world or setting with this character. There's other ways to do this as well, but like I said, I don't have all the time in the world to explain it here. So... plot. The plot is basically the meat and potatoes of the story. A plot is a sequence of events in a story that push it forward. It's basically a cause and effect, and pretty much shapes the story as a whole. You could look at any sort of media, including real life, and it would have a basic plot. In a plot, we first have the exposition or introduction, which is basically where we meet the main character and get a handle on the general idea of the setting. Next, we have the rising action, which is pretty much when the conflict of the story is introduced, if it hasn't already been. This part of the plot is also usually when the rest of the plot is set in motion, pushing the story forward. Thirdly, we have the climax. This would be where the biggest plot point is and what the rising action was building up to. The tensions of the story are highest here, making the audience feel a certain way depending on the tone of the story. We then have the falling action, which is where the tension of the climax has been released, and the story begins to slow down as we see the results and outcome of the climax. This could also be a point where you tie up any loose ends in the story, such as subplots or even something to do with the main plot itself. And finally, we have the resolution. This is the closure of the story. There are many ways to write a resolution. You can make it really long or short, it can end with an epilogue, you could give it any kind of ending you want, as long as it's satisfying for you and the audience. Unless, of course, you did that purposefully in hopes to make a sequel to your story. Then that's a different story for another day. You see what I did there? Theme. The theme of a story is an important idea that is woven within the story. It's not like the plot, the theme makes you think deeper. It could be a life lesson, it could be a theme about questioning morality, it could be pretty much anything. All of these are important to a story. These could make or break a story, and this goes for media dubbed for kids as well. Take, for example, Bluey. Almost everyone on Twitter, from what I've seen, is fawning over this show. Not just kids, but adults as well. And this is a show for preschoolers. And I can't really blame them. I've watched a few episodes of it, and I won't lie, I actually really like it. And yeah, it's simple, but effective. This is a good example of something being labeled as a kids show. Yes, the audience it was meant for was kids, more specifically preschoolers, but it has something for adults to enjoy too. This show also goes into different themes each episode, some being quite serious and even dark for a kids show, such as infertility, mental issues, and even death, and I honestly like that too. It helps kids to understand some more serious things about us and our world in a respectful and caring way. And I like shows like that. Shows that go the extra mile to teach stuff like that. This went from talking about why the "it's media for kids" argument is bad to a review of Bluey, and I am getting seriously off topic. The point I'm trying to make here is that a lot of media that is dubbed as for kids can also be enjoyed by adults, which also means they can critique it respectfully as well. And that's sort of what we need in this space, especially when it's painfully obvious that some movies and shows deemed for kids are not very good. Take, for example, Alpha and Omega. This movie sucks for multiple reasons. Firstly, the characters. The main characters, Humphrey and Kate, are very bland and generic. The plot, if you can call it that, is nonsensical, and the theme is basically Romeo and Juliet. I think there's a lot going on in this movie, to a point where I have no idea what the theme is, and that usually is not a good sign. So, because of my opinion, I can rightfully review and critique it, enabling the "this movie is for kids" argument when, no, it really isn't. This movie is for general audiences. Why do people like shows like Bluey or My Little Pony? The answer is most likely theming. Sure, their themes aren't the most complex things in the world, but for what they set out to be, they're doing miles better than anything Alpha and Omega is doing. And believe it or not, kids like good themes too. Kids are very smart and learn things very quickly. Kids also like things such as themes that feel more adult because it makes them feel older. And I can speak from personal experience because I watched and experienced things in my childhood that made me feel more like an adult. In my childhood, I watched shows and movies that were targeted towards teens and adults, such as Inuyasha, Futurama, The Simpsons, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, etc. And I also knew what things like creepypasta were, and though I was scared of it, I still enjoyed it because it made me feel more like an adult. And let's be honest, in reality, I think almost everyone has had something exposed to them in their childhood that made them feel older than they actually are. It's why I find the "it's a movie for kids" argument to be bogus, because most quote-unquote kids movies and or shows are made for everyone. Adults can enjoy anything a kid can, and if they don't like it, that's fine. If they want to critique it, that's also fine, because in the end, if they watched it, it shows that a movie/show isn't just for kids since they were curious or interested enough to watch it in the first place. If you were to share this argument with, let's say, Sonic the Hedgehog community, you know what you'd get? You get at least a good chunk of the fandom dogpiling on you because of that shit, and I'm sure we all know how toxic Sonic fans can be. By the way, I'm not saying that all Sonic fans are bad and toxic. As someone who is a Sonic fan, I am not this way. I know this is quite a different video from the videos I usually make, but I'm sick and tired of seeing this used as a valid argument everywhere, because it really isn't. It's a generally dumb argument because it's been proven time and time again that adults can like or dislike media targeted towards kids, and kids can like or dislike media targeted more towards adults. This has just been an idea for a script for a while, so I'd figured I'd spill my brain juice here. But with all that being said, thank you all for watching, and that's about it. Peace, and bye-bye.
And do you wonder it happened so fast? I try my best not to get stuck into the past.